TeaTime Chinese Episode 43, The History of Mandarin Chinese. Hello friends and welcome back to TeaTime Chinese. I'm Nathan. Before we get started, I would love to make a quick announcement. TeaTime Chinese has a new member on board. You may already know the two of us, me and Scott. Now we have a third member, and her name is TY. Let's listen to her self-introduction.
Hello to all the listeners of TeaTime Chinese. I'm TY. I'm a native Chongqing girl, meaning I was born and raised in Chongqing. Now I also live in Chongqing. I feel very honored and happy to be able to join TeaTime Chinese. I hope to support Nathan and Scott creating more interesting and valuable Chinese content that our brains can learn naturally and comprehensibly. I'm particularly interested in Chinese characters and differentiating two words that share a lot of similarities. I look forward to sharing that information with you. Talk to you then!
Thank you, TY, and welcome to TeaTime Chinese. Having you on board, I believe that TeaTime Chinese will become better and better and will help more and more friends learn Chinese. As you may tell, TY and I speak Chinese a bit differently. It might be an interesting opportunity for you to listen to different styles of spoken Chinese. I am from Shanghai, Scott is from Canton, and TY from Chongqing. We may show up together in future podcast and YouTube videos, and by then, you can try to find out whether we really speak differently. However, I'll still be hosting the podcast alone for some while. Today, what topic will we be talking about? We're going to talk about the history of Standard Chinese, or Mandarin Chinese. I believe that everyone who's listening to the podcast right now is learning Mandarin Chinese. I am speaking in Mandarin Chinese, and just then TY was also speaking in Mandarin Chinese. When did people start speaking this language? Is it the same thing as the Beijing dialect? Why do people speak it? These are questions we're going to answer today. Are you ready? Even for the same language, different accents would appear in different places. In English, there are different accents, and in Japanese, the same case, and there are certainly many accents in Chinese. Why would one language end up having a lot of accents? It's because in the old days, people rarely traveled. Nowadays, we can travel by plane, by train, to somewhere far away, but people in the past were different. They often lived in one place for all of their lives. People from different places rarely met and rarely communicated with each other. As time went by, they start to form their own style of speaking, which are accents or dialects. China is a big country, and of course many accents would appear. For a long period of time, there was no such thing as Standard Chinese. Each place would have its own dialect. Although each place has its own dialect, some places were more important, so there tend to be more people speaking this dialect. In ancient China, one important dialect was the dialect of Nanjing, or Nanjing Hua.
朋友，跟不上，踩到我脚了。Sorry， 对不起哦。这把头没得踩掉吧？
Where is Nanjing? Nanjing is not far away from Shanghai. Today, it takes just over an hour by train to travel from Shanghai to Nanjing. As we know, today the capital city of China is Beijing, but in the past, Nanjing had always been the capital. In our previous episode, we talked a little about the history of the three kingdoms. Do you still remember that there was a little kingdom called Wu? At that time, Nanjing was the capital city of Wu. Later, Nanjing also served as the capital city for the Qing Dynasty and the Song Dynasty. If you came to China then and learned Chinese during that period, you should be learning the Nanjing dialect. Then in the Yuan Dynasty, which was almost 800 years ago, the Mongols came to China and set Beijing as its capital. From that time, the most important accent was no longer the Nanjing accent, but the Beijing accent. The Yuan Dynasty was followed by the Ming Dynasty. During the Ming Dynasty, the Mongols left. Nanjing again became the capital. As you can imagine, Nanjing dialect was once again the most prevalent dialect. Because Nanjing dialect sounds very elegant, many people love speaking it. After Yuan Dynasty, it was the Ming Dynasty, and after the Ming Dynasty, it was the Qing Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty was the last dynasty of China. Where was the capital of the Qing Dynasty? It was Beijing. Therefore, many people were discussing whether we should be speaking the Beijing dialect or the Nanjing dialect. Later, more and more people chose the Beijing dialect. So Beijing dialect became the most prevalent dialect once again.
我欢喜我的中国样子的长头发，可以戴花，耳环子、铜牛子，全是宝石镶的。
During the Qing Dynasty, Western cultures were also introduced to China. The idea of nationalism was also introduced. Nationalism means that people of the same country, of the same nation, must have the same culture, the same language, and the same writing system. It was at this time that the Chinese people began to wonder, what should be the language for us? Later, it was decided that the Beijing dialect was the language of the Chinese people. Beijing dialect became standard Chinese for us. 普通话 means the common speech that people speak every day. Later, the Qing Dynasty came to an end, and China was no longer under any emperor, but under the Republic of China. The government of the Republic of China is the government of Taiwan today. From 1927 to 1949, the government of the Republic of China was Nanjing. Once again, Nanjing became the capital of China, but at this time, people did not shift from Beijing accent to Nanjing accent. Beijing accent remained as standard Chinese. In 1949, the government of the Republic of China fled to Taiwan, and China became the People's Republic of China.
中华人民共和国中央人民政府今天胜利了。
People continued the discussion. What is 普通话? Later, people gave a very complicated definition. In the podcast, I won't elaborate on this new definition, but simply put, under this new definition, 普通话 is not exactly the Beijing accent, but it's very similar to it. Today, when we are talking about 普通话, we're not directly referring to the Beijing accent, but it's something very similar to the Beijing accent. Although we already have a common language, the 普通话, there were still a lot of people who couldn't speak it. A lot of people could only speak Shanghainese, the Nanjing dialect, Cantonese, and so on. So the government of the People's Republic of China announced that all children in China should learn 普通话. At school, when teachers talked to students, they could only speak in Mandarin Chinese. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems the same way in Taiwan also, only that in Taiwan they call it 国语 instead of 普通话. Also, what is different is that people in Taiwan write traditional characters, while in mainland, people write simplified characters. I've talked about the history of simplified characters in a previous episode. If you want to know more about this subject, please check out episode 13. Nowadays, people in their 20s and 30s are the generation growing up speaking Mandarin Chinese. In 2021, China's Ministry of Education reported that 80% of Chinese people know how to speak Mandarin Chinese, which means that 4 out of 5 Chinese people are capable of speaking it. On TV shows, in movies, in the news, people all speak Mandarin Chinese all the time. Since most Chinese people now are capable of speaking Mandarin Chinese, does it mean that accents and dialects no longer exist? This is not the case. In many places, people speak Mandarin Chinese at school and at work, but they still speak their own dialects with their families and in their daily lives. In Shanghai, people still speak Shanghainese. In Sichuan, people still speak Sichuanese. In Canton, people still speak Cantonese. If people from Shanghai, Sichuan, and Guangdong are talking to each other, what language would they choose? Any guesses? Mandarin Chinese, of course. Thanks to Mandarin Chinese, Chinese people from different places can now communicate with one another. But unfortunately, nowadays, there are a great proportion of young people who grew up speaking only Mandarin Chinese, so they are no longer capable of speaking their own dialects. I've talked about Shanghainese in episode 21. I said that it was a pity that now less and less kids in Shanghai can speak Shanghainese. However, in the last 2 years, I've seen that more and more people are interested in dialects and want to learn them. Many people are teaching dialects on platforms such as TikTok, and many Chinese people are learning them. I'm very happy to see this phenomenon. Although the common language, 普通话, is important, dialects are also important. That's it for today's introduction of the history of Mandarin Chinese. Is your Mandarin Chinese getting better too? I believe that all of you who are listening to the podcast already have a very good command of the Standard Chinese. Once you have learned Standard Chinese, the 普通话, you can also learn other dialects. For example, now I want to learn Cantonese, because now I have some friends from Hong Kong. I listen to them speak Cantonese and it's very amusing for me, so I would love to learn it. What about you? Are you interested in any dialects in China? If you have been to China, what dialects did you hear? Of course, if you have been to Beijing only, the only accent that you might hear is the Beijing dialect. But if you have been somewhere else, I'm sure that you've heard of other accents. You can tell me about them on YouTube or by email. Our email is teatimechinese@hotmail.com. I will post the transcript of this episode on our website as soon as I can. If you would love to support TeaTime Chinese, you can join our Patreon. So, that is all for today's podcast. Thanks all for listening and supporting. I'm Nathan. I'll be seeing you next time. This is a TeaTime Chinese production. For more information, please visit teatimechinese.com.